Chris. Welcome back to another video. Um, in this video, I wanted to talk about a tool I've been using in the past week called Windhawk. So I'm going to give you a quick summary about it. While I'm doing that, I have come to a savannah and traded to get a desert map because I'd like to go to a desert to collect cactus. And I have acquired the desert map, so I'm going to follow it. We'll see how my camera work goes. So over the last week, I've been messing around with a tool called Windhawk, as said. It's an open source tool that sits on top of Windows and tries to be it's designed to be super low profile and just sit on top of Windows and change the way a bunch of stuff looks and behaves in the Windows UIs. It is super interesting because it gives you access to lots of stuff that you can't really change with regular Windows settings. And there are other tools that exist that do similar kinds of things, but they're often really constrained in terms of what they let you do, which I guess comes from a perspective of not wanting to allow you to, not requiring to sign up to as many things, but we'll come back to that. One of the interesting things that I've sort of discovered in the process of working out how to use Windhawk and design some of my own UI is about how Windows applications actually show the user information. So a lot of the modern Windows applications, which includes like the actual GUI of Windows, like the settings menu or whatever, but also like, I don't know, other apps like MS Paint and stuff. A lot of those use a structure called UWP. And this UI structure has sort of a nested thing where you define parameters at the top and then you sort of reference them and make different elements nested inside each other, a bit like HTML and CSS put together kind of thing. Anyway, they're arranged into trees, which kind of, if you've worked with that kind of stuff in terms of programming websites or whatever, you'll have some ability to grasp what's going on. If you know how to target the right element, then you can edit it in Windhawk. So Windhawk isn't like designing completely new things. It's always about editing things that already exist. And part of that is like you need to know where an element is located in that tree, in that structure, to be able to target it. And one of the key things with that is you could name the element specifically every time, which you can do, but then you will end up having lots more lines than you need in a lot of cases, because a lot of the time you want to edit lots of the same element in the same kind of ways, like you want to scale up a bunch of buttons or whatever, and then understanding the sort of shared properties of the different parts of the tree can make it possible to target with one command lots of different features of the UI. So Windhawk is obviously an open source tool, but it's actually like infrastructure that allows other people to make mods that change the way that the Windows UI looks. And one of the main things of that is there's a guy called Raman Software who's made a bunch of specific mods for changing things like the taskbar or things like the start menu or like specific named programs. Rather than just having it be a collection of tweets, it actually lets you sort of customize exactly the way you want to do it and the way you want to lay out things. This sort of UI is normally super restricted, right? Like it normally isn't accessible. Oh, I think I found the desert. This normally isn't accessible to the user, like in editing. So Windhawk gives you access to these things that you wouldn't normally have access to. So some of the things that you can do with it is like you can make UI elements transparent or translucent, which obviously Windows is designed around being opaque, so that's not really a thing in modern Windows. You can also break things into elements into pieces, so you can like take two layers and split them. So for example, I've split my taskbar into two halves, one with the system settings and one with the like apps on the left. I've also changed the way that the clock looks, so it's like cleaner, uses a different font, it's like bigger than normal, and I've changed some of the icons and logos in the taskbar. It's interesting because, I mean, Windows doesn't normally give you access to these kinds of things. Like there's some restricted access, like you'll have some options about like the size of, you'll have some options about like the size of items in the Windows UI, for example. Like you can change the zoom level or whatever, but it's a very coarse control for something where maybe you want to change each element individually. The thing that has been more interesting, thing I've really gotten into this week, is changing the start menu. So normally there's a bunch of stuff and it like loads a like web view instance and stuff to like let you Google search or whatever, which is I really don't like, but anyway, that's the way that Microsoft has gone with it. I'm going this way. Okay. Anyway, I've like reduced it down to very small number of elements on my machine. So it's just like the shortcut buttons and that's it. So it's like very small, which I find looks much cleaner. One thing is normally the elements are kind of static and you can't really change them, but there's now more optionality because the way that the search menu works inside of the start menu is with an Edge web view instance. So it's literally just a browser. It's just browsing an internal web page from your machine. And what you can do is you can change that web page by just injecting JavaScript or CSS into it, right? So that has been a kind of interesting sort of intersection between editing regular UI elements and editing something like a web page or the layout of a web page or whatever. It took a lot of messing around to figure out how things worked. And the nice thing about the other things, not the search menu, was that a lot of the ways to do things already existed because lots of people have made example themes. You can just download it straight out of the box, right? So you just look at how they do it and you kind of learn from that and figure out how to do it yourself. But in the case of the search menu, very few people have actually messed around with that, at least from what I could see in the themes that were publicly available. So I changed that as well. Like I cleaned out a bunch of elements that I didn't like the scroll bars or whatever, and I changed the size so it was much more compact. And I like removed the option to filter by different things from the like natively in the UI. Like you have to go to a search button now because I never use those anyway. And they kind of just a clutter, right? One interesting thing is like you kind of are a little limited in what you can do. I mean, you can kind of do anything, but you have to know how to do it. Let me just. One thing is like when you have a UI element, you can change if it's opacity or you can change its size or you can make it visible or not. And one thing is if you change the visibility to collapsed, it'll like remove the space that takes up. So you have to sort of balance taking away elements with like keeping things that fill out the space of the UI, right? Because you can't introduce new elements to refill the UI afterwards. Luckily, Windows is not optimized at all, and there's lots of stuff you can change for it super, super easily. And there's lots of stuff to get rid of or add or whatever you want. One of the things I've really been enjoying is like figuring out how to target an element in a way that's like super compact and neat. Like there's not necessarily a neat way in every instance, but the cool thing is that there often is a way to sort of collapse things that you've put together. Sometimes it's a little complicated, like because you'll want to move something by a few pixels to the right, but because you're actually working with margins and not positions of things in a lot of cases, you moving something 20 pixels moves something else. So it's kind of you have to figure out how to move the right thing in the way that you want to get just the outcome specifically that you want. I also ran into an interesting bug while I was coding. Basically, if you try to reduce the width of a container and there's something inside the container that's actually bigger, then it just causes the whole UI to crash. So on one of my accounts, because I had that thing enabled, it would like crash loop. And on the other one, it was working perfectly fine, which was super confusing. But anyway, I figured it out. I just like made the UI too big and then just squashed everything together. On the trust and security side, like as with a lot of things, you just find some code on the internet. Probably shouldn't give it too many permissions or run it without knowing what you're doing first. I have come to just trusting Ramen software to some degree, because they're you can't read every line of code that he writes and then use it. I mean, you could, but I don't think I have the time investment for that. But I read through one of his mods and sort of trust what he's doing. So to the degree that I'm trusting Windhawk, I'm kind of also trusting Ramen software here. In general, you should be super careful with tools. I mean, I trust Windhawk because I've kind of messed around with it and looked at it enough. But in general, you should be super careful because they interact with things at a system level, right? They can make UI do stuff that you wouldn't want it to do. In the case of Windhawk, it's kind of very transparent in that it only gives itself permissions to interact with specific applications for each mod, and you kind of decide that every time you start a mod. Um, but because they're interacting at the operating system level, if you're not careful, you could give a mod permissions that will let it do something malicious, right? So you do have to be a little cautious or thoughtful, at least, about what you're giving permissions to. Um, anyway, it's been super cool to mess around with this and kind of get an appreciation for often how messy the Windows code is that's underlying stuff, because Windows looks nice, but it feels like a different operating system when you can change the way that things look in this super dynamic way. And I mean, you reverse engineer UI, you look at things on the back end, it's super interesting to look at as a whole. I would say give it a try. Maybe mess around with a Windhawk mod. I think if you really want, it takes a few hours to like make it do exactly what you want, or you can just take an existing theme. Honestly, they're all kind of there. Anyway, that's been pretty cool. So I would suggest you go and check it out. I'm very, having a lot of fun messing around with it. And I've made something that I feel like looks really cool, feels really unique, feels really me. You can obviously do it really easily with other operating systems, but while sticking in the bounds of Windows, for the convenience factor. I think Windhawk's super cool. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for watching, Chris, and I will see you next week.